Well, hello. I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another movie to show you. And as you all know, it is October 1st. So I've been making a few changes you've probably already noticed for these Halloween themed episodes. So as you can see, I've changed the lighting setup a bit, made it a little more shadowy and spooky looking. I've also been working on getting some more props, making the setup seem more Halloween themed. At this point, I've just found a vampire bat, which it's spooky. It's also a pencil sharpener, so not not quite as frightening, but you know, it works well enough. I kind of like it. But now it's time to talk about the movie this week, and I've got a pretty big one for you. That being Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Now, since I'm recommending this to you, I'm going to keep this spoiler free. Even though most people know all the spoilers already, I still know for a fact there are many people who don't know any of them. So I'll keep it spoiler free for those people, and hopefully they'll check it out. So the story follows Marion Crane, who's played by Janet Leigh, and she has just stolen $40,000 from her employer. She leaves town, drives off, and she ends up taking a lot of back roads, and through that she comes across Bates Motel, a rundown motel sitting in front of a large Gothic house. And it is here where she meets Norman Bates, a nice but awkward young man who likes taxidermy and taking care of his mother. So, as most people know, this film was directed by Alfred Hitchcock, who's often known as the master of suspense. And in hindsight, this film really seems to check off all the Hitchcock traits. It involves murder, main character on the run from the police, blonde leading lady, lots of suspense, careful camera framing, Bernard Herrmann score, but when this film actually came out, it was viewed as kind of a departure from Hitchcock's usual films. I mean, for instance, The Color. Now, I think for a lot of people, they'd probably just see that it's an old movie and think, oh, well, it's black and white because it's an old movie, and old movies are always black and white. However, by 1960, color films were actually more popular. As movie studios were trying to compete with television, they would usually leave black and white films for lower budget projects or films that specifically required black and white. And out of the 12 films Hitchcock made between 54 and 66, only 2 of them were black and white. But color wasn't the only difference. Hitchcock shot Psycho in only 40 days with an $800,000 budget. He used his TV crew from Alfred Hitchcock Presents and limited himself to only a few sets and minimal locations. Now, on the other hand, his previous film, North by Northwest, had a big $3 million budget, lavish sets, and huge stars. So after hearing this, you might be wondering, why would he choose to do a cheap, quick movie like this? Well, it kind of goes back to when he saw this film in 1955 called Diabolique. It's a very famous low-budget French film from Henri-Georges Clouzot, and it's about 2 school teachers who carry out a murder. It was seen as shocking, thrilling, and was instantly compared with Hitchcock. And there were a few critics who actually remarked that with the lower budget, Clouzot had managed to out-Hitchcock Hitchcock. And with this in mind, Hitchcock began to look at some of the popular B-horror films of the time. They were cheap, shocking, and made tons of money. And so with this in mind, Hitchcock began to wonder, what if one of these films was made by a good director? So off he went. He found the Robert Bloch novel Psycho, he bought up a ton of copies to keep people from reading the ending, and he got the young writer Joseph Stefano to write the screenplay. And this is one thing that I find really interesting about Psycho. He abandoned his big budgets, big crews, big actors, big set pieces, and he scaled everything down. He doesn't focus on great performances or witty dialogue, but instead he focuses specifically on editing and shot choices. It seems like he's trying to show what you can do with a low budget. For instance, all the driving is done in these process shots known as rear projection. This was a technique where an actor would stand in front of a special screen and a background would be projected onto that screen, making it look like they were in a different place. And this was a very common technique to do back in the day, especially for driving scenes. Though it doesn't look very realistic, Hitchcock makes it work, much like he did in Vertigo a few years earlier. He chooses to use this sense of the unreal to his advantage. He plays the voices of Marion's friends and coworkers over these shots, and it creates a sense of unease as she's imagining what they're saying about her. And this, combined with the Bernard Herrmann score, creates a very dreamlike feeling that is only accentuated by the stark black and white cinematography. And this is one thing that I think is really made apparent in the Gus Van Sant remake. It's an almost shot-for-shot remake of the original 1960 film, only this time it's in color and updated to the 90s. And seeing these same sequences in color and in a more modern context just further emphasizes how unusual and one-of-a-kind this film really is. I mean, put this film next to any other at the time, including Hitchcock's, and this really stands out. And I think this is one of the reasons Psycho has stood the test of time. It's one of the highest rated horror films on IMDb and resides at 14th on AFI's Top 100 Movies list.
Can't believe it. Can you?
Now, since I am doing a video on Psycho, I feel kind of obligated to talk about the shower scene. Now, if you don't know what I mean by shower scene, then you really just need to watch the movie. I'll put a timestamp to skip to so there won't be any spoilers. So then you finish that video, and go and watch the movie. You just need to do it. So yeah, there we go. Just wait for the timestamp. And here we are, the shower scene. The scene is so iconic, and really rightly so. You can find references to it pretty much anywhere nowadays.
Oh, listen, didn't you see that Alfred Hitchcock picture?
The fact that the main character of the film, Marion Crane, is just murdered out of nowhere is insane, really. They build this whole plot up in the film with the money and her running away, and it's just immediately cut short. And she wasn't even murdered for the money. She just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, really. And I've never seen a movie, definitely before, or really since, where the film has built up going one direction and then just cuts and does almost a 180 for the second half. And I really think that's one of the things that made this film such a big deal to begin with. I mean, he did this whole ad campaign where people wouldn't be allowed in the theaters after the film started. And so once people got in there, I'm sure they were expecting some big twists and turns to happen early on. For the first 40 minutes, really it just follows this one plot line, which makes it even more surprising when it does such a 180 shift like this. And aside from the shock factor, this is also just a very well crafted scene. It's really interesting how the scene is basically a bunch of pieces that, when editing, our mind just puts them all together. And so even though there are a lot of stabbing motions, with the editing and the music, we never actually see the knife stab the body.
Each cut was like a stab of the knife, and eventually the audience said, in their mind, this was a knife, that was a knife, and it was a cut.
And director Martin Scorsese said he actually used this scene as the basis for one of the fight scenes in Raging Bull. But I can go on and on analyzing this scene, and to be honest, it's been done much better by a bunch of other people. So I'm just gonna say, if you want to watch more analysis on this particular scene, I'd recommend checking out the documentary 7852. But now before I go, I want to put a spotlight on two more things: the music and the acting. The music was done by Bernard Herrmann, who was a longtime collaborator with Alfred Hitchcock. He had first composed for Orson Welles on Citizen Kane, as well as working with Welles on his Mercury Theater radio show. He was known for making scores which felt otherworldly, yet also added to the emotions felt on screen. His music has been incredibly influential on many composers, including John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith. And I feel his scores are actually one of the reasons Hitchcock's films hold up so well. The music transports you into Hitchcock's world, and Herrmann's score for Psycho is certainly one of his best, and definitely his most iconic. An interesting thing a lot of people don't know, initially Hitchcock saw Psycho and was so disappointed with it, he thought he might have to edit it down and put it on his TV show. But once he heard Herrmann's score for it, he immediately doubled the composer's salary, saying that a third of the effect of Psycho comes from the music. And though Hitchcock reportedly said he didn't focus a lot on the acting in Psycho, it still has some iconic performances in it. Janet Leigh does a great job playing someone who the audience can empathize with and care for despite her mistakes. However, it's Anthony Perkins who really stands out in this film. He apparently had quite a lot of creative input on the character, and the character of Norman Bates was actually one of the bigger changes from the book. Originally, he was much older and less sympathetic than Perkins made him, so I think this change actually made Norman Bates feel more like a real person, having both good and bad traits to him.
We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
So there you go, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It's probably one of the most famous films I've talked about, so I'm sure a lot of you may have already seen it before. And even if you have, I definitely recommend checking it out again, especially if you're looking for something more spooky this time of year. It's available on all the big streaming sites, and physically, there are a ton of options. As you've seen, I have the DVD, and it's pretty solid. There are also plenty of Blu-ray options if you're into that, and now there's actually a 4K Blu-ray out. And I mean, if you got the TV and player for it, I definitely recommend it. Alright, so now it is time for the comment question. And so I'm going to be asking, what's your favorite Alfred Hitchcock film? He's made some very iconic films over the years, and I feel everyone has probably seen at least one of them, so put your favorite down below. Other than that, like this video if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to see more. I'm going to be talking about one horror film every week this month, so be sure to tune in next week to see what I'll be talking about then. But until then, keep watching movies, and I'll see you next week.